I've always known there's a doomsday scenario of how to evacuate and keep a president safe, to maintain the American government's chain of command in the worst nuclear disaster. I never thought I would be sitting on that military aircraft, watching that plan go into effect. It was a chilling feeling.
There was, a lot of discussion as to where the president should go. They wanted to keep him moving, and moving targets obviously harder to hit.
Tracking Air Force One with the president on board is the responsibility of a command post inside Cheyenne Mountain. This is the nerve center of North America's air defense. Dug into the granite are 15 two-story buildings mounted on springs, designed to continue to operate in the event of a nuclear attack. The focal point for North America's air defense is this command center, 2,000 feet inside Cheyenne Mountain. It was built during the Cold War, and most of the equipment here was designed to look outwards, over the oceans and over the North Pole. That created a problem on September the 11th. In searching for potentially hostile planes, the military could see less than a fifth of the 4,000 planes in the air. They were tracking 001, the president's plane. Yet they found themselves partially sighted, just as the Federal Aviation Administration was reporting a growing number of hijacks.
We were receiving calls from FAA now that were saying, hey, this may be a possible hijack, or this aircraft may be a possible hijack. We got an emergency there in JFK. It's double fuel.
It's a fair shot.
We did not know how many more there were, whether 5, 6, 7, or 8.
Eventually, we had the President, the Vice President, and the Secretary of Defense of the United States on the line.
When the Vice President called, he said that our primary responsibility this time, because at the time we didn't know how many more there were, was we had to protect the civilian government infrastructure there in Washington, D.C. So that was one of our #1 priorities at the moment after he called, and that was what he wanted us to do. At the same time, we had to monitor, Flight 93 and all the other potential hijackers that may be occurring at the same time.
At that point, we had jets in a position over both New York and Washington, D.C.
A man comes on and identifies himself as being with the Secret Service, and he says, we need to protect the house. And flying over Washington, D.C., you look down and see the Pentagon burning. Now it's like, yeah, we need to protect the White House. Something's tragically gone wrong here, and the Secret Service is asking for our help, and of course we're going to give it to them.
The authorities that we were given finally were to consider airliners that had been hijacked in this form as being hostile aircraft. The words that I remember coming over the phone over our secure lines were basically, we will take lives in the air to preserve lives on the ground. Which of course meant that we knew that these were airliners, that there were many innocent civilians on board, but that we couldn't afford to allow those to hit major population centers again on the ground as they had done at the World Trade Center.
It's like someone being executed. The executioner, it's not his decision to execute. That decision was made, in a court of law under a legal system. So we're basically, we're following orders.
The fourth plane, United Flight 93, crashes into the ground in Pennsylvania. For a time, the president didn't know whether fighter planes had shot it down. Only later does the story emerge that passengers had fought with the hijackers. Had it proceeded to Washington, Flight 93 would have been intercepted.
It was a great relief, I can assure you, to everyone when we learned that the plane had not been shot down, that in fact had crashed for other reasons. We weren't sure why. But I remember my husband saying that he suspected there were heroes on that plane.
At the time that it crashed in the hills of Pennsylvania, it was about 93 miles from the F-16s, 93 to 96 miles from the F-16s that were over top of Washington, D.C. If he had continued on, we would have directed the fighters out to intercept him, to attempt to divert him, and then if he would not have diverted from a path going directly towards Washington, D.C., then ultimately we could have directed them to engage or shoot down that aircraft.
At 10:05, alarm sounded, a steady electronic beep followed by a recorded male voice saying, "Evacuate the White House." Doors burst open, with scores of staffers moving out, with Secret Service agents telling them to move faster and faster. And some staffers were told to remove their IDs so they couldn't be singled out by possible snipers outside the White House gates. Across the road from the White House in Lafayette Park, police and Secret Service agents run into the streets with automatic weapons. The capital becomes a city of panic and rumors. It is believed wrongly that a bomb has exploded at the State Department. All government buildings begin to evacuate.
Everybody start heading that way. Let's go this way, all the way out to I Street. Let's go.
Largest Navy base put under an increased security condition called Threat on Charlie.
Tell them to come to me as soon as you can, because we may have to move. It collapsed right now, as you can see. I assume you're taking our picture. I do not have a monitor, but right now we just had a middle section here of the E-ring of the Pentagon collapse from the amount of fire and destruction from this. So obviously there was a great deal of damage here. It just collapsed.
Those inside Cheyenne Mountain now take an unprecedented step to defend their command center.
The blast doors were closed that morning for the first time in anger since this place was opened for operations in 1966. We received intelligence that there might be another airliner airborne from a city in the United States whose target was specifically Cheyenne Mountain. So we did what we call buttoning up the mountain. We closed the blast doors, and everybody that was in the mountain was going to stay for a while. I've never been in combat, and that morning was the first morning that I had ever really faced a real threat.
We were receiving all kinds of inputs from everybody. I mean, we received an input that there was a yellow transport truck coming up the hill with 7 Islamic folks in the front cab.
Once I realized that we had those blast doors closed, I think they could have launched airliners at this mountain all day. And we never would have felt the effects of it because we have 2,600 feet of granite above us. We have 2 25-ton blast doors protecting us.
God, what a hole.
Okay.
It's a huge hole.
I decided to go take a look at the North Tower to see how it was doing. And as I flew by the North Tower, there's a lot of smoke and fire. It didn't look real good, but the hit was so high, the impression I got was that maybe this would just burn out from the top and to be able to save the rest of the building. So as I flew by it, I decided to go up and fly over the top of it and take a look down at it just to see if it was listing or leaning. Nasty and I were both over right by the North Tower. I was over the top looking down at it. and right at that moment, it just started falling away from me. And I couldn't really comprehend what was happening. It wasn't until I saw some of the plume coming out from the bottom of the building that I realized that it was imploding upon itself. And at that point, that's the sickest feeling I've ever had in an airplane.
My father worked in a skyscraper in Chicago when I was a kid, and I think about 18,000 people worked in the skyscraper. So when the towers came down, I thought at least 30,000 people were killed. Sorry, stop.
Watching that go on, it felt like we were at war, and it felt like we, at that point, like we were losing.
We were going to do whatever it took to keep that from happening again.
Good morning, sir. This update briefing is classified.
America's nuclear strike force is controlled from U.S. Strategic Command.
Thank you. Task Force 134.
That day, military commanders from their blast-proof bunker 60 feet underground are conducting a major exercise involving America's nuclear forces. They decide to cancel the exercise immediately, and like American forces worldwide, are now put on DEFCON 3.
So what are they going to provide you in that briefing?
This is the highest state of alert since the 1973 Arab-Israeli War.
This command has practiced for 50-plus years for the unthinkable. We did not know how big it was going to be. With the airplanes, we had to worry about other types of activities such as chemical or biological attacks. So we war gamed those to see where would they occur, how would they occur, and what would our response be.
This is also the home of the National Emergency Airborne Command, which operates the so-called doomsday planes. Their purpose is to control nuclear forces from the air in time of crisis. It is decided to deploy the doomsday planes.
Well, one of the primary purposes of those airplanes is to provide strategic command and control for the President, for the Secretary of Defense, and the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff with the major military command centers. And so having them up fit that purpose perfectly. They were already up, and so we used them that way.
What? The doomsday plane. Is that what that was?
Hell yeah. What was that plane?
The doomsday plane. That took off from Andrews.
You guys, please, all the way to 8th Street, please.
Melissa?
Secret Service agents take to the roof of the White House looking for more planes. During the day, 21 aircraft are identified as possible hijacks.
We don't normally do this. We'd like you to go.
That morning, it's decided to execute a secret plan to ensure the survival of the American government and its leadership.
In order to ensure continuity of government, we evacuated the leadership completely out of the city of Washington to a secure location.